6 people were on board. None survived. And within hours, the identities connected to this private jet crash began revealing a story no one expected. Not just about aviation, but about timing, decisions, and the questions that follow when something routine turns into the unthinkable. This wasn't a storm-chasing flight. It wasn't a remote airstrip. It happened during takeoff from a major U.S. airport, under conditions that, while challenging, were not unprecedented. So what made this departure different? And why are investigators now focusing on a sequence of small details that together may explain everything? At approximately 7:45 p.m. local time, a Bombardier Challenger 650 attempted departure from Bangor International Airport in Maine. According to publicly available information from aviation authorities, the aircraft did not complete its takeoff and crashed on airport grounds. Emergency crews responded quickly, but officials later confirmed that all 6 individuals on board, 4 passengers and 2 crew members, were presumed deceased. Early reports contained conflicting numbers, which sometimes happens in fast-moving situations. However, follow-up statements clarified the final count and confirmed there were no survivors. Investigations of this nature move carefully, and official findings can take months. Still, even in the first 24 hours, certain pieces of the puzzle began to form. And one of the first details that drew attention: who was flying the aircraft? The captain, reportedly identified as 47-year-old pilot Jacob Hosmer, was described by those who knew him as experienced, professional, and deeply committed to aviation. A longtime colleague reportedly called him a great pilot and someone who took safety seriously. Those descriptions matter because in aviation investigations, pilot background is always part of the broader picture. Not to assign blame, but to understand the human side of the system. But here's where the story becomes more layered. This aircraft had arrived from Texas before the planned departure. Public records reportedly connect the jet's registration to a company sharing an address with a Houston-based law firm. Multiple media outlets have noted that individuals linked personally and professionally to that firm were believed to be on board, though official confirmation of passenger identities has been handled with care out of respect for families. Why does that matter? Because this flight, according to reports, may have been part of an international business trip. That suggests planning, scheduling, and logistical coordination, the kind where delays, weather, and timing decisions can all intersect. And that brings us to another factor investigators are almost certainly reviewing: conditions on the ground. Bangor was reportedly experiencing winter weather at the time. Snow was falling, and seasonal storms were affecting parts of the region. Airports are equipped to operate in winter, and crews trained specifically for these environments. However, winter operations add layers of procedure: de-icing, runway surface assessments, visibility evaluations. Each of these steps is routine, yet each introduces variables that must align correctly. Here's the key point: aviation incidents rarely come down to a single cause. Experts often describe them as a chain, a sequence of small, individually manageable factors that, under specific timing, connect in ways no one intends. So investigators will likely examine questions such as: what were the runway conditions at the exact time of departure? Were there any mechanical alerts or anomalies reported? How did weather timing align with takeoff clearance? What communications occurred in the moments before the event? An air traffic control recording circulating publicly reportedly includes a description of the aircraft's position after the crash. But officials typically analyze full transcripts, radar data, and cockpit recordings before drawing conclusions. Context matters, especially in aviation. And then there's the aircraft itself. The Challenger 650 is a well-known business jet used worldwide, generally regarded as capable and reliable when operated within guidelines. That shifts the focus not toward assumptions, but toward specifics: configuration, performance data, and environmental conditions at that exact moment. Because takeoff is one of the most carefully calculated phases of flight. Before every departure, pilots determine something called performance margins. These calculations consider aircraft weight, runway length, altitude, and weather. Even small changes, temperature, wind direction, surface contamination, can affect those numbers. Procedures exist to manage these variables, which is why investigators meticulously reconstruct the scenario down to seconds and meters. But there's another element that often goes overlooked in early reporting: human workload. Even experienced crews operate in dynamic environments. Taxi instructions, checklists, weather updates, timing windows, all happening in sequence. Modern aviation is built around redundancy, meaning no single factor should be enough to cause an accident. So when something does happen, the analysis becomes about interaction. Systems, environment, and decisions overlapping in a narrow window of time. And this is where the timeline becomes critical. Emergency responders reportedly arrived very quickly after the incident, which suggests airport systems functioned as designed. That tells investigators something important. The event unfolded rapidly. When response is immediate, it often indicates there was little warning before the outcome. But here's the question that keeps aviation experts watching closely. Was this a performance issue, an environmental factor, or a systems-related event that revealed itself at the worst possible moment? Because each of those paths leads to very different findings. Performance-related events focus on runway dynamics and aircraft capability. Environmental paths examine contamination, visibility, or sudden changes. Systems-related inquiries look at mechanical or technical signals that may not have been obvious in real time. Right now, publicly, no official cause has been stated, and that restraint is intentional. Aviation safety investigations prioritize accuracy over speed. Preliminary data can point in directions that later evidence refines or even contradicts. Still, the human side of the story continues to unfold. Friends and colleagues of those believed to be on board have shared tributes describing them as dedicated professionals, family-oriented individuals, and people active in their communities. Those reflections remind us that beyond technical analysis, real lives and networks of people are affected whenever aviation incidents occur. And it raises a broader perspective many overlook. Business aviation, while often seen as private and exclusive, operates under structured safety systems similar to commercial aviation. Training standards, maintenance protocols, regulatory oversight. When an event happens, it's not outside the system, it becomes a case study within it, which leads to something few headlines mention. Every major aviation investigation changes something. Sometimes it's a procedural refinement. Sometimes it's new guidance on weather thresholds. Sometimes it's equipment checks or training emphasis. The industry evolves through lessons learned, carefully, methodically, and often quietly. So while headlines focus on what happened, investigators focus on why, and more importantly, how to prevent a similar chain from forming again. And one more detail adds complexity to this case. This flight was scheduled at night. Night operations introduce perception differences. Lighting references, surface contrast, visual cues. Airports are designed to accommodate this, and crews train extensively. But when combined with winter weather and operational timing, night adds another variable to an already detailed equation. Again, not a cause by itself, but possibly a piece of a larger picture. So now the investigation moves into its most technical phase: data gathering. Flight data recorders, cockpit voice recordings, radar tracks, weather logs, maintenance history, crew training records, all reviewed together, not separately. Because in aviation, answers come from connections, not isolated facts. And as information continues to emerge, one thing becomes clear. This event is not just about a moment on a runway. It's about how multiple layers of safety interact under pressure, and what can be learned when those layers are tested. But to understand why this investigation could matter far beyond a single airport, we need to zoom out. Aviation safety isn't built on the idea that incidents just happen. It's built on the understanding that every flight is the result of overlapping systems: human, mechanical, environmental, and procedural. When those systems work together, flights feel routine. When they misalign, even slightly, investigators look for the pattern. And patterns don't always appear immediately. In the hours after the crash, authorities focused on securing the scene and documenting physical evidence. That step alone can take significant time, especially in winter conditions. Snow, lighting, and ground impact areas must be carefully preserved so analysts can later reconstruct angles, speed, and aircraft attitude. Why does aircraft position matter so much? Because it can help determine what phase of takeoff the jet was in when the event occurred. During takeoff, there are critical thresholds, moments when a crew transitions from accelerating on the runway to committing to flight. Performance calculations before departure are designed around these points. Investigators will likely examine whether the aircraft had reached expected speeds and how its motion aligned with those pre-flight numbers. At the same time, another team begins reviewing communications. Air traffic control recordings provide timing, who said what and when. But just as important are the gaps, pauses, overlaps, background context. A normal-sounding exchange can still be part of a larger operational picture. Controllers, like pilots, work within procedures designed for clarity and predictability. If weather reports were updated shortly before departure, that timing becomes relevant. If runway surface reports changed, that's noted. If other aircraft reported conditions, that information enters the record. Again, not to point fingers, but to map the environment. Then there's aircraft maintenance history. Business jets like the Challenger 650 undergo scheduled inspections based on hours flown, cycles, and calendar intervals. Investigators check whether all required inspections were current, whether any recent discrepancies were logged, and how those were addressed. Even small maintenance notes can provide context, not necessarily indicating failure, but showing what systems had attention recently. Meanwhile, specialists analyze performance modeling. Using aircraft weight, fuel load, passenger count, runway length, slope, and weather data, they recreate the takeoff on computers. These simulations don't assume error. They test scenarios: optimal performance, reduced performance, environmental impact. The goal is to see whether margins were wide, narrow, or exactly as expected. And that leads to an important reality. Aviation margins are designed to be conservative. Pilots don't plan for perfect conditions. They plan for variability, but margins depend on accurate inputs. If weather shifts between calculation and takeoff, crews reassess. If runway conditions change, numbers update. That's why timing becomes such a critical investigative thread. Which brings us to human factors, one of the most studied areas in aviation safety. Human factors doesn't mean human mistake. It means understanding how people interact with complex systems. Fatigue, workload, communication flow, task sequencing, all are examined. Modern cockpits include checklists, call-outs, and cross-verification specifically to manage these pressures. So investigators will ask, were procedures followed as designed? Did anything increase workload at a critical moment? Were there distractions, or was the environment stable and predictable? These questions are standard in every major aviation review. And here's something viewers often don't realize. Investigations don't just look at what went wrong. They look at what went right. Emergency response timing, airport coordination, communication protocols, all evaluated. If responders reach the scene quickly, that confirms systems functioned. If coordination was smooth, that's noted. Safety improvement includes reinforcing strengths as well as identifying gaps. But beyond the technical layers, the human impact continues unfolding. Communities connected to those believed to be on board have shared memories, emphasizing professionalism, family ties, and civic involvement. Those perspectives remind us that aviation connects lives across cities and countries, business, personal commitments, shared goals. Each flight represents plans, responsibilities, and expectations that extend far beyond the runway. And that's why investigations carry such weight. A single finding can influence training manuals worldwide. A procedural clarification can adjust how crews interpret conditions. A design review can refine how systems communicate information to pilots. Most changes happen quietly. No headlines, just updated guidance and checklists. But over time, those adjustments are why commercial aviation has achieved such high safety standards. So where does this case stand now? At this stage, authorities typically release only confirmed facts. Speculation, even well-intended, can interfere with families and the investigative process. That's why official language often includes terms like preliminary, subject to change, and ongoing analysis. Transparency and patience go together here. But there's another dimension to consider: decision-making under uncertainty. Every flight involves choices based on available information. Weather reports, timing pressures, operational plans, evaluated in real time. Aviation training emphasizes structured decision-making models precisely because environments evolve. When investigators review events, they examine not just the outcome, but the decision context at each step. Was the information available at the time consistent with a safe departure? Did conditions change unexpectedly? Were safeguards triggered as intended? These are not questions with instant answers. They require data correlation across systems. And then there's the question many viewers wonder about. How long will it take? Comprehensive aviation investigations can take months, sometimes longer. Preliminary reports may outline basic facts, time, aircraft type, general circumstances. Final reports include analysis, contributing factors, and safety recommendations. The goal isn't speed, it's accuracy that can inform global standards, which leads to a broader takeaway. While events like this are rare, the aviation system treats each one as an opportunity to learn. Safety improvements often come from understanding unlikely combinations of factors. That mindset, constant review, continuous refinement, is why flying remains one of the most regulated forms of transportation. Still, behind every technical document are people whose lives shaped communities, families, and workplaces. Responsible coverage balances those realities, respect for individuals, and commitment to understanding systems. And as new information becomes verified, it helps clarify not just what happened that evening in Maine, but how aviation safeguards adapt moving forward. As the investigation continues, attention gradually shifts from immediate response to long-term understanding. This phase is less visible to the public, but it's where the most meaningful insights often emerge. One major focus will be recorded data. Modern business jets are equipped with systems that track flight parameters: speed, altitude, engine performance, control inputs. When available, this information helps investigators reconstruct events second by second. It's not about assumptions, it's about measurable trends. Did the aircraft accelerate as expected? Were engine readings consistent? Did flight control inputs match standard procedures? These questions are answered through data patterns, not guesswork. Cockpit audio, when reviewed, is handled with strict protocols. The purpose is not public release, but technical understanding. Checklist flow, timing, coordination. Even routine-sounding exchanges can clarify workload distribution or environmental cues at specific moments. Then comes environmental reconstruction. Meteorological specialists review official weather observations, radar imagery, wind shifts, and precipitation timing. Winter operations introduce specific considerations: surface friction, braking action reports, and how quickly runway conditions may change during active snowfall. Airports conduct regular assessments, and those logs become part of the investigative record. The key idea here is variability. Weather isn't static. A runway condition report from minutes earlier may differ slightly by departure time. That doesn't imply failure. It highlights how dynamic environments are managed. Investigators look at whether available information matched actual conditions closely enough for safe planning. Next, aircraft performance. Specialists evaluate margins. Every takeoff involves calculated distances. The runway needed to accelerate, decide, and either continue or safely stop. These calculations include safety buffers. By recreating the scenario digitally, analysts test how close the operation was to those buffers under different assumptions. It's a way to see how sensitive the situation may have been to small changes. If margins were wide, focus shifts elsewhere. If margins were narrower, the interaction of variables becomes central. And here's something important. Investigations don't assume a single cause. Aviation safety uses a layered defense concept. Aircraft systems, training, procedures, airport operations, all designed as barriers. When an incident occurs, analysts examine how multiple layers aligned in a way that allowed an outcome to develop. The purpose isn't blame, it's strengthening each layer. While that technical work proceeds, regulatory bodies often issue interim communications if they identify time-sensitive insights. These aren't conclusions, but precautionary reminders, clarifying procedures or emphasizing specific checks. Most viewers never hear about them, yet they quietly reinforce safety practices worldwide. Meanwhile, the personal side of the story remains present. Tributes shared publicly describe individuals known for professionalism, leadership, and community involvement. Those reflections are part of why aviation investigations are treated with care. Behind each data point is a network of lives and relationships. It also underscores why official communication avoids speculation. Accuracy honors both the technical mission and the people connected to the event. So what happens when the final report eventually arrives? It typically outlines a factual timeline, Aircraft and crew information. Environmental conditions. Analysis of contributing factors. Safety recommendations. Those recommendations may address training emphasis, procedural clarity, equipment guidance, or operational awareness. Often the changes are subtle. A wording update in a manual, a reminder in recurrent training. But over time, those refinements strengthen the system, and that leads to a broader understanding. Air travel safety evolves through continuous learning. Each investigation, even of rare events, contributes to a global knowledge base shared across airlines, manufacturers, regulators, and training organizations. It's a collaborative process that prioritizes prevention over headlines. Which brings us back to the central question this story raises. How do routine operations stay safe in complex, changing environments? The answer lies in layered preparation. Engineering, procedures, training, communication, and review. When an event tests those layers, the response isn't to simplify the story into one moment. It's to understand the chain, strengthen weak links, and ensure the system adapts. That's the long-term outcome investigators work toward. In the end, the story isn't only about a single flight, it's about how aviation responds when the unexpected happens. With methodical analysis, respect for those involved, and a commitment to improving safety step by step. As verified information continues to emerge, it helps clarify how multiple factors can interact and how safeguards evolve in response. Understanding that process offers a clearer picture of aviation as a system built on constant learning. If you want a deeper look at that side of aviation, that's where the story continues.